Life Audio.
Christian Parent Crazy World with Catherine Segars is brought to you by Life Audio and is part of our Faith Toolkit series. For more inspirational faith-affirming podcasts, visit lifeaudio.com.
Welcome to Christian Parent Crazy World, the podcast that tackles tough topics to help you be a godly parent in an ungodly world. I am your host, Catherine Segars, and in today's episode, we will tackle this vitally important question: how do we safeguard our kids from the dangers of social media? You know, the Surgeon General came out with a very troubling report recently on social media usage among children that should concern us as parents. What are those warnings, and what do you need to know to safeguard your kids? Well, we've invited Dr. Walt Mueller back to break it all down for us. That's the plan for this episode of Christian Parent Crazy World. So let's get started. Just a reminder about our incredible guest today. Dr. Walt Mueller is the founder and president of the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. He has a Master's of Divinity and a doctorate in postmodern generations. He also has 4 kids and 6 grandkiddos, which gives him a lot of up-close and personal practice at understanding the next generation. Now, if you were here for the last episode on children's entertainment, I don't have to tell you what a wealth of wisdom Walt is. The beast of social media can keep us up at night. I mean, how do we approach it? Well, in today's conversation, Walt and I will start off talking about the good things that we should celebrate when it comes to technology, our iPhones and our tablets and computers, and also social media. Yeah, you know, there are a lot of good things, and highlighting that helps us not to be so discouraged when the bad news hits. But then we're going to dig into the Surgeon General's report, telling you many things that we as parents and grandparents absolutely need to know. Then Walt is going to give us some vitally important questions to ask ourselves in terms of our device and social media usage and how to start those conversations with our kids. It's so good. And then finally, I'm going to wrap it all up with some really important guidelines. That sounds like a really good plan. So let's jump right in. Walt, welcome back to Christian Parent Crazy World. I know my audience just loved our last episode where we talked about kids' entertainment. So good to have you back.
Thank you.
So our audience knows you a little bit by now because we tackled a critically important topic in the last episode as we discussed the grave concerns lurking around out there in our kids' entertainment. For those of you who may not have tuned into that, first off, please do. It was so awesome, so practical, and so much wisdom that Walt shared with us there about shepherding our kids' hearts in the area of their entertainment. It's something that we are charged to do as parents, and we need to be. Sometimes I think we just don't know where to start. I think that last episode gave us a lot of good places to start having great conversations with our kids. But why don't you just tell us again, very quickly, for anyone who might be tuning in for the first time, about the organization that you founded, the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, Walt?
Right. We've been around for 35 years, which is hard to believe. It's been like a blink. But our goal here is really to understand what's happening in the youth culture. We work to keep our finger on the youth or keep our finger on the pulse of youth culture so that we can communicate that to those who've been called to nurture kids in the Christian faith. Mm-hmm. We believe that the Christian faith speaks to all of life. Our discipleship is about everything we are, everything we do. And so we want to help parents and youth workers and others understand what's happening in the culture that maybe is, deforming or misdirecting our kids. And we want to help you understand how to bring the light of the gospel to bear on those things to lead our kids into a lifetime of whole life Christian discipleship, biblically faithful Christian discipleship. So we really are about knowing the world and then how the gospel speaks to the world. I love John Stott, the great theologian. I love something he said that some people, when I quote it, it sounds at first like heresy, but he said every Christian's need 2 conversions, one from the world to Christ and one back into the world with Christ. And so we want to raise up kids who are faithful in their faith and faithful followers of Jesus Christ. So we're there to help you with that. Just go to cpyu.org, loads and loads of resources, 35 years worth.
Yes.
There's more on there than I know that's on there. And so we've worked very hard to create resources for parents and others.
I'm kind of amazed. I'm amazed when I've been poking around there, all of the resources that you have for parents there. So I know it's a place that my parents in my audience are going to want to definitely spend some time, because you have incredible prompts that you can print out. You've got one on social media and God's glory. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But today's topic, we're talking about the dangers of social media and our children. You have an excellent podcast out recently on Youth Culture Matters, where you and some of your research fellows and youth workers at CPYU discuss the recent U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on social media usage and our children. That was, I think, episode 179. I'll link that for my listeners. But there was a lot to be concerned about there. It was deeply concerning. But you started off the conversation. I love this. You don't want to be alarmist.
Right.
You started off talking about some of the benefits that we might find with social media. So before we get into the deeply concerning stuff, let's start with some positive stuff. What is good out there for us and our kids when it comes to social media?
Well, one of the things that we say right out of the gate is that it's easy for a tool that seems to be the undoing of so many, right? So let's talk about our smartphones, the technology itself, and then also social media. It's very easy to just say, let's get rid of it. We don't want to have it. So I've been tracking lately with some of the stuff that's going on about, they're talking about, making TikTok illegal, getting rid of TikTok here in the United States. And my initial reaction is, man, that'd be great, because, there's so much happening on TikTok that's so negative for our kids.
Right.
I don't know that that's really, the answer. I think we need to teach our kids how to manage it better, and certainly they would create better content. Truth be told, I'd love to see TikTok go away. So,
I think I would too.
yeah. But the bottom line is these are great and wonderful tools that are really gifts from God in so many ways, but they can be used like anything, right? In the wrong direction. We want to train our kids up to use these tools in ways that bring honor and glory to God, that advance the kingdom of God, as opposed to, in the opposite direction, advancing the kingdoms of the world, the flesh, and the devil, which is just our undoing. And we're seeing a lot of that. But we're seeing people use these things in great ways. So what are some great things? I mean, just the fact that you and I can communicate right now.
Yeah.
You are where you are, and I'm where I am, and we're, probably 1,000 miles apart. I didn't do the measurements, but it's close to that. When could we have done this before? And I shared with you when we got started today, this is the third Zoom meeting I've had today, and we've recorded resources over Zoom with people who live all over North America. And so that's a wonderful thing. Your grandparents who are listening, to be able to connect with grandchildren who live thousands of miles away through FaceTime is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I mean, the way these tools can be used to advance the gospel, to build relationships, to generate friendships. Of course, flesh and blood. Presence with each other is great, but just the ability to communicate is a wonderful thing.
Right.
And in addition, I think about, well, I'll give you one example here with the beauty of technology is, with our physical health, just the way technologies have been developed that foster our human flourishing and physical health in a world where, because of sin and brokenness, there's disease, there's death, there's heartache, there's pain. So a simple example would be, I've got a 10-year-old grandson who just about 4 years ago now was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He lives an hour and a half from me, but he has the ability to manage his insulin, and he's had this for 4 years with some devices, and it's crazy. He's got a Dexcom that reads his blood sugar at any given moment in time. He also has on his body a pump where he can, put blood sugar in. He has two phone devices, each that operate one of those, and then he wears an Apple Watch at 10 years old. So when he's on the school bus or at school, his mother can communicate with him, and I can pick up my phone wherever I am, and at any moment in time, I can tap onto an app and see what his blood sugar is. So, wonderful things like that. Educationally, the way that we're able to, just think about what's happened with education. And there's a downside too. We can talk about that. But there are wonderful, wonderful things if we use these things correctly. I just think for those of us who are Christians, I was a seminary student in the early 1980s. And if I wanted to learn anything, there was nothing I'd find on a computer. It was all in the library. And now, I don't want to say books are obsolete, but I can do research on things without going to a library just because everything's been digitized. So, I mean, it goes on and on, just, how great technology is and the wonderful things that are there. I would say for social media, for kids who are extremely shy and maybe have trouble connecting, there are some good things there that are documented that this helps our kids build friendships. Now, of course, you can go too far or friendships can become really negative, but this is a gateway for some kids like that to actually make connections offline that now or online that can continue now offline. So, I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, people should make a list of all the wonderful things about technology. So just in our daily lives.
Learning disabilities.
Yes.
I've got one who she really struggles with a reading and focus. And so a lot of the books that she has to read, we have found there's a guy, he's a grandpa, he's an older guy who's recorded the books, all the books that she needs to read, and she can go online and listen to the books,
Yeah.
And I love books on tape and stuff, or we used to call them on tape, but digitized versions of books. There's so many things that we can do. I don't know how some of that plays into social media. She was able to get on some channels on YouTube. That YouTube is one of those things that can suck our kids into bad things, but it can also lift them up with good things and ourselves as well. So I love that list. I love starting off our conversation talking about the good stuff
if I can add to that, I'm just thinking about how we use it here at CPYU. So we have a Facebook page, and I know kids aren't on Facebook, but we have a Facebook page. We in real time, we can let people know about what's happening in youth culture, and in real time, we can make people aware of the resources we've created, like in a moment, right? I mean, email the same thing. We can do that. We do the same thing with an Instagram page we have. We have a Twitter feed.
Right.
We're not on Snapchat or TikTok at this point. I don't know if we ever will be, but just being able to get things out there. And you've done this, I'm sure, with your show, but I have a Facebook group that meets every morning for anybody who wants to get in there, but there's about 300 people in a group where for several years now, we've been reading every day the same devotional book every morning, and I'll post something on, some commentary on what we're reading in the book, along with opportunities for people to weigh in, share prayer requests, insights they've had. And that's been great. We're going through Alistair Begg's Truth for Life, Volume 2, because we went through Volume 1 a couple of years ago. And it's really, I mean, that's a great thing.
Yes, it's wonderful.
It's a wonderful thing to be able to use social media for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to start something like that. I always have my hands full with the 5 kids and everything, but my generation was more Facebook oriented than Instagram. And certainly I do like YouTube. I mentioned in the last show, I get sucked into apologetic videos where people are defending the faith, and I could watch those like all afternoon. And I think that's a really good and healthy thing to do, as long as I'm not skipping my kid's math lesson. But I love that. But that's something I've wanted to do. I kind of miss that aspect of Facebook. I've kind of drifted away from there. I'm one of those people that just kind of has an aversion towards, some people have love-hate relationships with social media. Mine has been more of a hate. But I've been meaning to actually reach out to my subscribers and stuff and see who would like to do that, to get into a group like that. I don't care if it's just a dozen people. I think it would be really fun just to connect in that way. That's what I think it's good for. That's what I think Facebook is good for. But like you said, our kids aren't there. They're in other places. But I want to then talk. We've got that wonderful, healthy list of things that are good about it for us and for our kids. But the Surgeon General had this advisory recently. It was deeply concerning. The findings were quite shocking, actually. I'm going to read part of this. Another organization called Access put this on their website. They talked about the Surgeon General. They said that they only issue an advisory when there is an urgent public health issue. So if you look at the opening paragraph of the report, it says, quote, social media use by youth is nearly universal. Up to 95% of youth ages 13 to 17 report using a social media platform, with more than a third saying that they use social media almost constantly. A third of youth, almost constantly. And then you go on to learn that in the report that 40% of kids ages 8 to 12 are using social media regularly. They talk about how between 11 and 12 years old, that's where most kids receive their first smartphone. Fully 95% of teens have access to a smartphone, and 46%, again, say they are almost constantly on it. That is deeply concerning. That signifies there's an addiction here with many kids, if not most kids, when it comes to these devices and when it comes to social media.
Yeah. And two things I would point out, and I'm glad you brought that up about the introductory paragraph and the advisory. I'm looking here, and I think you read most of this, but advisories are reserved for significant public health challenges that require the nation's immediate awareness and action. That's right, direct from the
Yep.
And let me just say this about, the Surgeon General and the government. They're typically, I know some people could argue this, but they're typically not quick to jump to conclusions without data first. Mm-hmm. And the data has to back that up, especially when it's related to something like social media, which is obviously new. And obviously, there are huge economic considerations for the way our country operates, if you demonize something right away. But I think it's, I'm glad that the warning came out. I think it's in some respects late, because much of what is coming out in the data is what any of us who have been watching, we know anecdotally these things have been happening. So, yeah, there's definitely some concern about that. But just a couple of things in relation to what you just said in terms of negatives. One would be, what an incredible time waster, because when you think about what they're doing, it's flipping, it's swiping through from video to video, from reel to reel. And it just is a rabbit hole you go down that you don't realize you're down there until maybe several hours later. Because when you look at the statistics on screen time, and they're all over the place, whether you're talking to the Surgeon General's report or a lot of the good research that's coming out of the Pew Research Center,
right?
Pew being PEW, and maybe you can link to some of their stuff. They've come out with some new research as well. Or Common Sense Media, which is another organization out there that tracks screen time. And so 2.5 years ago, and so we can assume these would be low because they've been on the rise for, numerous years. They would say that for our 8 to 12-year-olds, daily entertainment screen use is over 5.5 hours a day.
Oh, my gosh.
That is not time spent in front of a screen for schoolwork or in school.
Right.
It's daily 5.5 hours a day.
Right.
For our 13 to 18-year-olds, is over 8.5 hours a day. And, we're curious about adults as well. Mm-hmm. Adults tend to trend up to sort of where the older teens are, up, 7-8 hours when we stop and we really think about it. So you're talking about stewardship of time. And if we're spending all of our time doing that, that means we're not spending our time doing other things. Mm-hmm. And, look, I'm a baby boomer, and I remember the biggest complaint, we'd go away on a retreat, with people our age, teenagers our age, or college students our age, and, we'd have this time of confession, and everyone would say, I'm not having my quiet time. I don't have enough time in the day for a quiet time. I can't imagine what that's like for kids now. And so we have to guard that, and even for adults, we waste a lot of time. There's research coming out right now, data coming out right now, that our kids are complaining that as parents, we're spending too much time. They can't get our attention because we're buried in our phones. And one of the things I would say consistently is if you have a family member, whether it's a spouse, a child, a parent, who comes to you and says, hey, you've been spending way too much time on your phone. And usually this has been snowballing, right? And now it's at a crisis point. You feel like your relationship's falling apart. Don't argue it, because perception is reality. And what that person is saying, they're saying, you've got to peel back for the good of us. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's important. I mean, there's so much packed in there just in the time. But I want to throw something else out. And it's not just, how much time we spend, but it's the distractive nature of these things. So Tony Reinke, about 5 or 6 years ago, wrote a book called 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. I've had undergraduate and graduate students in the classes I teach read that as a textbook. And what Reinke does is he lists 12 things that they know phones are doing to us, right? So I give an assignment and I say this. I say, I want you to read the book. And if you're a youth worker, I want you to write a paper for me and list just your sense. You don't have to do a survey on this, but just from your observation, list the top 3 of his 12 that you see in your students. And then I want you to, when you're done with that, I want you to go and I want you to think about yourself. List the top 3 that you see in your own life as you look honestly in the mirror. How is your phone affecting you? So first year I did this, and the results are not surprising now, but the first year the papers came back. And when we looked at the students, the reality, the one way that the phone was affecting them, 2.5 times, the number one was 2.5 times more than number 2 was distraction. Mm-hmm. That we're distracted. And when it went to the youth workers, number 1 for them, 2.5 times number 2 was distraction. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, we see this, right? Yesterday, my wife and I pulled out of our neighborhood onto the street and heading up onto a main street. And there was a guy walking on the shoulder of the road who we watched him as we sat at the light, and then we went past him. He was probably 30, 45 seconds with his face in his phone as he walked and not paying attention to traffic. No sidewalk. He's on the side of the road. And I just said to my wife, there it is right there. This is us too. Yeah. That we get distracted. And so, again, when we can't focus. I had somebody tell me yesterday about sitting behind a guy in our church who he will often bring his laptop to church during the worship service. And he's typing notes and he's looking up, if the pastor mentions a particular quote or a theologian, he'll hop in there and find out who it is. But there's other windows that open up as well. Yeah. And so so there's that multitasking that cannot happen. The brain doesn't function that way. And the research has shown that. It's called dual task interference. You can't do 2 things at once because you don't do either of them in the optimal way. There's like a traffic jam that occurs in the brain, dual task interference. So again, these are just some of the things that are happening and why we need to build in borders and boundaries, not only on what devices they have and where they go when they're on those devices, which by and large we don't know because they're buried in, their eyes 15 minutes or 15 square inches of glass. That's very personal. And then on the time. And so now what they're using, how they're using it, how much time they're using it, and where they're using it. And I like what you said a little bit earlier about, don't bring it to the table. Don't watch TV while you're eating together, that sort of thing. And look, that is a whole nother issue. Family dinners are a thing of the past. Sacred. And they shouldn't be. We need to recover that.
You're right. And it's difficult with, work schedules and crazy things, but who can be there? They need to be there and they need to be present and it needs to be a time. We have this wonderful my kids love it. We pull it out, this family conversation thing. You can find those little cards, those are my kids absolutely love them. We use them so much. I need to get some new ones. So we got some new questions to go through because we've already answered all the old ones like a dozen times, but making sure that is connection time and also talking about your day. Hey, what's going on here? What opportunities have you had in your relationships lately? What are you learning in these subjects? How does that apply to what we know in scripture? And just using that as a time to concentrate on the spiritual formation of your kids or just relational formation. It doesn't always have to have an object lesson to it, but just really connecting with your kids. And unfortunately, we're not doing that nearly enough. Hey, here's an idea. Put the phones down and go for a walk with your kids. I mean, just like out in nature and have a conversation with them without any phones around, without any music, without any earbuds in, just have some connection time with your kids. But some other concerns that I saw, this was one of the things that mentioned, because what are the ramifications of all that time? Because I can't get over how much our kids, and perhaps some of us as parents, how much time we're spending on these devices, how much time we're spending on social media. As you mentioned before, I just want to reiterate this. The average, according to the report, 8th through 10th graders spend an average of 3.5 hours. Then I think 1 in 4, 25% spend over 5 hours, while 1 in 7 spend over 7 hours a day on social media. So that's just kind of mind blowing. And there's different statistics out there and different reports, but that is just deeply concerning. And one other thing that the report said is that kids who spend over 3 hours a day, which is the average that these kids are spending, most of them are spending over 3 hours a day, quote, they face a double the risk of experiencing poor mental health outcomes, including symptoms of depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
End quote. I have been told by my directors at Life Audio, who I podcast for, anytime you can do an episode on depression and anxiety, do it.
Yeah.
Why is that? Well, we're feeding them all of this stuff, this alternate reality where everybody has, frankly, if you go on Instagram, most of the time it's just fake lives. You had a really great parent prompt that I was reading through about things that we could and should post and things we shouldn't. People are posting things that make their lives seem like they're one way when they're actually not the reality of what those people are experiencing. And our kids are seeing this. And why isn't my life like that? Why isn't my body like that? Why isn't my skin like that? Why don't I have those trophies? You know, it's just the best of the best. It's not reality. And no wonder our kids are depressed. No wonder our kids are anxious because they got their heads in phones all the time telling them that everybody else's life is perfect and their life isn't that way.
Yeah.
How do we then help to counteract that with our kids?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say this, a lot of this really is symptomatic of a scriptural truth, a spiritual truth that we all have experienced, and we read about it in Romans 8, this groaning of culture for ultimate redemption. And I would even go back to say, the great quote from Augustine, that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. And he's talking to the Lord. We've got restless hearts of people who are not redeemed. And this doesn't mean that when you come to faith in Jesus Christ, this desire to be on social media or the temptation or the potential for addiction and distraction disappears. It just means that we have to be more aware of the power of these things to undo us. And so, there's Pascal. I'll go back to another old guy. Pascal said that in each of us, and as an apologist, you know this, right? There is this God-shaped vacuum. It can only be filled by God. And I think what you're seeing on social media, not just from young people, but from adults as well, is evidence of these deep insecurities and longings for God, that if we think that the hole in our soul can be filled by the number of followers we have or the number of likes that we have, or if we just get the selfie just right. This is not a kid problem. This is a human problem, and it stretches across the age groups. And so now to go back to what you said about mental health, let me bring up one aspect of this that was talked about in the Surgeon General's report. I'm going to read this. On a typical weekday, nearly 1 in 3 adolescents report using screens, most commonly social media, until midnight or later. We know that the great majority of kids have been sleeping with their phones. Oh. And they say they sleep with their phones because they, don't want to miss anything. Like what goes on, right, overnight, but because everybody's now sleeping with their phone, there are things going on overnight. So A, they don't want to miss anything, and B, they want to be there for their friends if they need them, which is an indicator as well of trouble in the adolescent world, as you've said, with and some of these things, very real issues related to family brokenness, kids fearing, for their safety, but also the mental health and the anxiety and the stress issues. So let me say, I want to tell you just 2 things. One is that when it comes to, and we've got something on our website on this about teens and smartphones and sleep, that parents, you have to get the phone out of their room, because a teenager needs about 9 hours and 15 minutes of uninterrupted sleep for healthy growth and development. Anybody who has ever gone to a counselor because you're feeling depressed or you are depressed, the first thing a good counselor will ask is, how are you sleeping? And we can't address your issues and your problems until we know you're sleeping well.
Yes.
And I have over the years struggled with insomnia, so I know what that's like. Anybody who struggled with that, you're not getting a good night's sleep, it starts to undo you. And so we've got to get the phones out of the room so they can get to sleep, because that's one of the things that's contributing to the mental health issues, just the viral epidemic of mental health issues, stress and anxiety and depression among our kids. So that's one thing. But let me say something about anxiety, and I'll share it with you in a story. I went to a Christian school locally here, where I live in Pennsylvania, to speak one night to parents on this very topic. And before I got up, the assistant headmaster of the school, she got up to introduce me, and she said, "I'd like to tell you all the story. Just last week, we were sitting around the table in our home. We have two children, a son age 17, a daughter age 14, almost 15. And as we're eating dinner, our daughter spoke up excitedly and said, 'I can't wait till my 15th birthday.' Because at 15, in this family, we're allowed to get our first smartphone." And she no sooner said that than her 17-year-old brother just turned to her with a very serious look and grabbed his phone, I guess, out of his pocket, and he held it up and he said to her, "Don't do it. Don't do it." 17-year-old kid. He said, "I've had this thing for 2 years, and it's totally undone my life. I am more anxious than I've ever been, and I just know it's not good." Now, that's what's amazing. When a kid says to a kid, it's got to be bad for that kind of awareness to actually, exist. And as we get more and more technological tools, I just saw, and maybe you've seen this. We have Xfinity up here, and I saw an Xfinity commercial, which is an internet service provider, television, landline, and everything else, Wi-Fi. And the commercial, it's two kids sitting on a front step of a house, and the one maybe is, a 10-year-old older brother, and the other one is a 6-year-old younger sibling. And the older one says to the younger one, "When I was your age, we didn't have," and then and I just thought to myself, that used to be generation
right.
to generation. Now it's within generations, that's how fast the technology is changing. And that's why we have to stay on top of this. And so, we got started years ago in looking at technology. What was it? Back in 2007, the iPhone comes out, and Steve Jobs says, every now and then, I'll misquote him, but I'll paraphrase here, every now and then a new invention comes out that changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I'm going to introduce you to one of those inventions. And it's true.
Yep.
The iPhone. And when you look at the rates of depression, Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff wrote about this in The Coddling of the American Mind. Jean Twenge wrote about it in her book, iGen.
Yep. The
statistics started to spike in 2007, and they've been going up ever since. And now it's a question like what are we going to do? And then we think about, issues related to sexuality and gender. Mm-hmm. Our kids are finding tutorials not in what they watch and what they listen to, YouTube, that this stuff is there. The social contagions of what's called rapid onset gender dysphoria, especially among our middle school girls, fed by social media and the narrative they see there. The Surgeon General report says this too. I'll read this. Social media does perpetuate body dissatisfaction, disordered eating behavior, social comparison, and low self-esteem, especially among adolescent girls.
Yes.
When asked about the impact of social media on their body image, 46% of adolescents aged 13 to 17 said social media makes them feel worse. 40% said it makes them feel neither better nor worse, and only 14% said it makes them feel better. And I'm just going to say, I did not grow up I'm in middle school in the late 1960s. We didn't even call it middle school. We called it junior high. This is how old I am.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the pressure I felt as I'm coming of age, going through puberty. Where's this all going to end? What's happening to me? Walking the halls of that school during the day, feeling like everybody was looking at me and seeing the things that I thought were my imperfections and just the bad stuff about me that I saw in me. Okay, so you're automatically, as an adolescent, I can't imagine there's many who don't struggle with this. You're struggling with what's happening in your body. That was a 5 to 6 hour period of pressure during the day when I was with my peers. When I was home, I didn't have that pressure before school, after school. And I loved leaving school and going home because it made me feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's ever present, 24/7. And you're feeling this pressure constantly. And when you're flipping through Instagram pictures and you see, who you think to be the good looking people with the perfect bodies and that sort of thing, that just makes you feel less than. And let me just say, I'm going to throw this in with where we're going with ChatGPT
Mm-hmm.
and artificial intelligence, which now allows us to just say something and it creates it. Like I could say, create a picture of me, of Walt Mueller standing on top of Mount Everest. I haven't done this, but I'm sure it could be done. It would search the internet for a picture of me and it would put me on Mount Everest. And now people are creating false identities, filtering themselves, trying to look good because they feel they don't measure up. And it's especially bad for our girls. But I will say this, I just read more data this week on the fact that it's not even yet, but it's starting to even out male and female with our kids on body dysmorphia and disordered eating. So our boys are feeling the pressure too.
Oh.
Yeah. And this all, again, let's set up borders and boundaries. Let's talk with our kids about these things and help build resilience. It's not flush it all down the toilet. We may need to take it away for a period of time.
Yes.
But we have to teach them how to use these tools to God's glory and not to our undoing, because they're going to leave our homes and they're going to have these tools and more for the rest of their lives. Who knows where it's going?
Right. We need to help disciple them in ways that they can use it responsibly when
Yes,
because they're going to have it when they get out on their own. And so we definitely need to be there. And what you started off saying, that is so disturbing. Parents, listen to me. I've got some guidelines I want to go over here in just a second, but don't let your kids have their phones with them at night.
Yeah.
That my kids turn in their phones in the evening and we keep them in our room over on a port where they can charge and stuff, but they do not, and turn your phones off at night. See,
oh, yes.
This is what you're saying is it starts with us. It starts with our modeling the right behavior, but also creating healthy boundaries with our kids because they can't do that themselves. And that story, I remember you telling that at the conference of that young man, the 17-year-old, who realized because clearly he had an addiction to that at this point, and he loved his sister and wanted to prevent that for her.
Yeah.
That is tragic. That is sad. And we as parents need to step in and make sure that we're helping to do that for our kids. I love what you have here. You have a really great prompt that you gave a handout at the conference. It's a parent prompt on social media and God's glory. There were so many good things in here. You go over the statistics, and this is something that they can get off of your website. I'll definitely link it. But conversation starters that you had on the third page, asking your kid, first you ask yourself. I love this. Ask yourself these questions. Am I spending too much time on social media? Am I addicted to my smartphone? And am I constantly engaging with social media, posting updates, counting responses and comments? Do I find my value, worth, and identity in what I look like to others? So that's some questions we need to be asking ourselves as parents, but ask your teenager, do you think people can spend too much time engaged with their smartphone and social media? If so, how much is too much time? Do you have friends who are addicted to social media? What do you think the signs of social media and smartphone addiction might be? What are they? How do you think social media and smartphone addiction affects a person in their day-to-day living and relationships? These are conversation starters. If you put the phones away at dinner time, maybe you can have with your kids, or take them out for a walk, or go sit on the edge of their bed and have a conversation about what that looks like. I know recently, actually it was a little over a year ago, we took a phone away from one of our kids, and it was like a long-term thing. It was for a good bit of time. And wow, the difference it made in this child. This child was dressing one way and they started dressing a different way. They just were happier and more engaged with the family. They were less distracted, more focused. It was just there were influences there that I hadn't realized. There were some apps on the phone that I didn't even know were there. And it's so hard to keep track of it all, Walt.
Yeah,
it's so mind-boggling to keep track of it. But we have to do that. One thing I want to recommend to the listeners, we talked about this just briefly in the last show. Definitely, if you haven't seen it on Netflix, watch The Social Dilemma. That's a documentary that came out in 2020. It's on the cultural impact of social media usage on regular users. It also talks about those algorithms that are there that get us sucked in and our kids sucked in to where it is an addiction. It becomes an idol. We don't want to in any way encourage idols in our own lives or in the lives of our kids. So definitely give that a watch. If you haven't seen it, I need to watch it again. It's been a couple of years.
Yeah.
But it started with this quote. I mentioned this in the last episode. This is Sophocles. Nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse. So it is vast. We started the show talking about the good things that can come from this, but the concerns are cancerous. They can become malignant in our children and in us if we don't get this under control. So we need to start with ourselves. That's what I would recommend that parents do. And then help our kids, guide our kids in this area. They need discipleship in this area because this is a vast thing that can become a curse in their lives. And we want to help them manage it properly and get the best usage out of it and get the blessings out of it and avoid the curse.
Can I share something? You know, as you talked about taking the phone from your child there, I brought to mind probably about 12, 13 years ago, when I would be speaking on this at youth worker conferences, I would have, I have hands go up, questions, and youth workers, the one question I was getting more than any others, what about, like when we go away on a youth retreat, should we tell the kids not to have their phones? And I said, well, what happens? What have you seen happen? Of course, well, they're hysterical. They feel like you ripped their arms or their legs off. How am I going to survive? And I said this, I said, if you truly understand how God made us, and God made us as relational beings, and God made us for flesh and blood relationships, and God made us to be together with each other, that should really dictate how you answer this question. Yeah. And I would tell them, I said, give it a shot. I'm going to tell you, you're going to get protests on Friday night. Unfortunately, one of the protests you're going to get is from parents who want to stay in touch with their kids, but let them know you have a phone. I don't know why. I wanted my kids to go away for the week, right? I don't want to have a conversation. Take them, right? Go. Don't bring them back late on Sunday, later than you intended. Yeah. So, but I said, shut it down and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And over the years, these youth workers would come back and they'd say, we had some protests, but sometime around Saturday morning, Saturday at lunch, kids are acting like they're experiencing something they've never experienced before. And they are loving it. The fact that there's no distraction and they're able to look in the eyes of their peers, they're able to be with their peers, not be distracted, and they're experiencing relationally what God made them for. It takes away the distractions, right? It takes away the multitasking. Right. It allows your Bible teaching to sink in maybe a little bit more, the whole thing, right? They're worshiping more clearly.
Yes.
But overall, and so it's not even a question anymore. Shut it down.
Yes.
And just be present with each other. The same holds true for families.
That is so true. And when you mention that, the kids getting hysterical and arms flailing, that is a sign of addiction withdrawal.
Yeah.
That right there.
Yeah.
That is a sign of addiction withdrawal. If they are hysterical at taking it away, they are addicted to it. And it could be for some reason you never even imagined. I had a show earlier this year with Dr. Rondi Smith where there was a child who, starting at the age of 12 and throughout of all of her teen years, she had what you would probably call an addiction. But what happened was she was approached by a sexual predator who got a picture out of her when she was 12 years old, who was actually a distant family member who told her, if you miss our meetings that we have, that I have scheduled, that I am going public with this picture. And of course he got her, she thought that he was a 12-year-old from a neighboring school. And he said he was going to kill himself if she didn't send a picture. Right. A 12-year-old can't process that.
Yeah, right.
This 12-year-old is sitting there thinking, okay, I don't want this person's death on my hands. Sent the picture. The second she sent the picture, he turned around and sent her her own father's name and phone number and said, if you don't meet me every single week, when I say we meet, I am sending this picture to your dad. And she was, of course, petrified. This went on for her entire teenage years. So if there is that form of withdrawal, it may just be that they're addicted to it because they have to have it, right? It's like breathing to them.
Yeah.
And they're sleeping with it in the bed. But it could be something much more serious, like this poor young girl who was being sexually exploited for nearly a decade, and she would panic if her parents did anything with her phone because she was terrified that she thought it was her sins. It was really his sins. She had been exploited at such a young age. So we need to make sure we need to regularly schedule times where our kids are not engaged with social media and not engaged with their phones. They're engaged with their peers, hopefully in youth group, and they're engaged with us.
Yeah.
Because we have to do that.
What you're talking about here is a whole nother world that's called, and we're writing some things on this now, sextortion.
Yeah.
And that has a name.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more and more kids falling victim to this. I have probably, friends in ministry, talked to 3 or 4 in the last 4 or 5 months who have actually had kids, teenage kids get sucked into this. And so people are not always who you think they are. If there's someone you don't know, you don't engage.
Right.
And we need to teach our kids to run from that. This is another reason why we don't put phones in the hands of 10, 12, 14-year-olds. And I'll just say this, people ask me all the time, at what age? Well, every kid's different. So I don't think there's a standard age. Is your child someone who has the wherewithal to make good decisions? Do they show good decision making? You don't put a phone in the hand right away that's able to take pictures, send pictures, all that sort of thing. But some of the folks that I've been listening to who are medical experts, I'm thinking of Dr. Leonard Sachs right now, who's written extensively on this. He said, 16, 17 years old.
That sounds so much better.
That's when you get it. That's when it's tough. But so for the parents of younger kids who are listening right now, set your standard right now, because that way you don't have to double back. The older parents of older kids who are listening, this will be troubling. But you can always, I think in the context of relationship, when we find out there's dangers, we warn and we build borders and boundaries that are needed to keep our kids from harm and provide for their well-being.
That's true. And I think we definitely started too young with some of our kids.
All of us would say that, right?
Yeah. Well, you would have an old phone.
Yeah.
You would have an old phone that they couldn't really have their own account with, but they had certain access to. And I just didn't realize the ins and outs of all the technology. I thought it was just being used to listen to music and stuff. And then I'm like, wait, you're communicating. How did that? It kind of got out of control. It kind of spiraled. So we definitely need to be proactive. I'm going to go over a couple of guidelines as we're wrapping this up. I got these from Unplugged off of Focus on the Family. I thought they had some really good guidelines here. Begin with yourself. We already talked about that earlier. Set predictable and enforceable ground rules for social media. You might even consider limiting social media usage to large screens in communal areas of your home. I think that is, don't consider that. Do it. Yeah. We have our computer. I'm actually podcasting from my classroom, which is downstairs, and it's got this door, and we used to have a computer in there. I'm like, no, the kid's computer is going on the dining room table, not facing the exterior wall window behind them, but facing where everybody walking by can see exactly what they're looking at. So make sure that they're using that in public. Be very careful about usage on their tablets or on their phones in their rooms. Know how to set and control parental controls on the devices. Set clear rules about internet safety, such as, this is really important, especially with your younger kids, because I've got my kids on reading eggs and things like that. And sometimes I'll let them watch certain things online that we're monitoring, but they need to know very early. Don't reveal names. Don't reveal where you go to school. Don't reveal your home address. Make sure they understand we never reveal that to someone we do not know. Delay access for preteens and teens, appropriate ages. And I think that horse is out the barn in our house. And I can relate to those parents out there that feel that way. I think 16, 17 is an excellent age. We started a little earlier than that. And frankly, I regret it. But for example, some of these social media platforms do have age restrictions, like you have to be 13, which is way too young for some of these, I think. Monitor the amount of their screen time. A lot of our devices, you can put monitors or restraints on those so they can only use them during certain hours and for a certain number of minutes a day. As I said, also, we want to educate them about sexual predators and let them know.
Yes.
If something like a sextortion happens, you can talk to mom. You can talk to dad. You are not going to get in trouble no matter what you have done, no matter what has transpired. You can speak to us. We are going to love you. You will not get in trouble for this because that was a sexual predator. This was man was in his 30s. So make sure they know that they can come to you about that. Make sure if and when your child does have a social media account, that you are friends and that you follow them. Be diligent. Don't be paranoid, but check up on their apps. That's a hard thing to do. You've got to go through those apps every day, go through their correspondence. Who are they texting? What text chats are they in? That's a whole other animal we haven't even talked about, but just they're texting incessantly throughout the day. And I want to reiterate this one. Don't let your kids sleep with their phones. Don't let them keep their phones they need that time away from any contact with the outside world. They need to be in your home without that phone for a good solid 8-10 hours at night. And we homeschool. I don't want them having their phones they're going to be distracted all day. They can't really get their work done. So that is really important. I would also urge my listeners to check out that Social Media and God's Glory, the parent prompt that you sent out. I will link to all of that in the show notes. Any final thoughts that you have for us on this topic of social media?
Yeah, overall, we're talking about borders and boundaries, so necessary. But ultimately, what we're training them towards is to become their own border and boundary maker from a heart that is changed and bent towards desiring to bring glory to God. So training them and nurturing them in the faith is where we start. And this is the beauty of being with our kids over the course of their childhood and their adolescence is, to be able to point them to making good, wise decisions as they exercise good discernment.
Mm-hmm. Walt, I cannot thank you enough for helping us to understand the benefits and the dangers of social media with us, because we're going to start with us and with our kids. This has been so practical and educational. Please tell us where we can learn more about you, your organization, CPYU, the Center for Parent Youth Understanding, and your podcast, Youth Culture Matters.
Yes. It's pretty easy. Just go to cpyu.org. That's our homepage. And as you start to scroll down, you'll see everything we do, including our podcasts. You'll be able to find all of our resources. There's a resource tab on there. The parent prompts you've talked about, the trend alerts that we put together, family devotionals that we put together. They're all there and more. So just go to cpyu.org.
There you have it, moms and dads. I hope you feel better prepared to tackle the topic of social media with your kiddos right now. This is an episode where you will definitely want to go back and check out all of those resources and my show notes and the show notes that you had on that wonderful episode that you had on this topic with Youth Culture Matters. Walt, I love those show notes. Like I said, I spent a lot of time prepping for this show in your show notes. So they're excellent. But moms and dads, we don't need to be paranoid, but we do need to be proactive. If our kids are constantly on these devices, that is called an addiction. Take it away and see what happens. If there's a withdrawal there, then that's a sign that your child is addicted to it. Take it away from yourself. Are you feeling that draw, moms and dads? We can't really help our kids with something that we're struggling with ourselves. So we need to step in and put healthy boundaries around ourselves and advocate for healthy boundaries in the lives of our kids by implementing these guidelines and having those healthy conversations. That is what it means to be a good and godly parent. So definitely check out the Center for Parent Youth Understanding. There is so much I'm just amazed that you could camp out there for months and months, just really going through and sifting through all of the amazing resources you've put together, Walt. Thank you for that. So be sure to check that out. And the organization, it's there to help you. It's really there to help you be a better parent. And that's what we all want. Thanks again, Walt. I really appreciate you spending all this time with us. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Next up on CPCW, we will be talking about the issue of pornography. Moms and dads, we have got to discuss this issue with our kids before they discover it on their own. Kristen Jensen is an expert on how pornography is affecting the next generation, and she has created some incredible resources that will help you get ahead of this issue with your children. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I want to thank you for joining me today. Look, I know there are a lot of things you could be listening to right now, and I really appreciate that you took this time to spend with me. I hope you will join me for my next podcast when we take aim at some aspect of our culture that threatens to derail our parenting and steal our kids' faith. If you enjoyed this episode of Christian Parent Crazy World, would you consider telling a friend and sharing it on social media and giving it a good review over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and following me on Facebook and Instagram? Oh, and maybe you could say that Christian Parent Crazy World is the best podcast you've ever heard in your entire life. Just a thought. And be sure to check out my website, which is CatherineSeegers.com. That's Catherine with a C. I have lots of articles and resources there that will help you on your parenting journey. And if you subscribe, I will be sure to send you some really cool free stuff and notify you of future podcasts, articles, and blogs. I want to end this and every episode with a word of encouragement. God gave you your kids, your specific kids, for a reason. That's because you hold the key to unlocking who God created them to be. We'll see you next time.
Christian Parent Crazy World is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review this podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.